and we will just dive into it. All right, Caleb Campbell, welcome back to the podcast. How are you, brother?
My man, my heart is good. It's full. My mindset's good. My family's healthy. I'm good, man. I'm good.
I was just talking with you off mic that it's been a long time since we've caught up, and that we were, I think, texting and just said, "Oh, let's just record a podcast and we can catch up," because a lot of the questions that I have for you are likely to be informative and eloquently delivered in the way that you do. And so here we go.
I feel
I
like though you're onto something. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I feel like
No,
it's
go.
if we can just like create a podcast around like friend phone calls and catch ups, A, it would be much more efficient because it's like integrating a podcast into your everyday life. And B, I feel like those are like sometimes the most valuable conversations because they're real. Nobody knows anything's being recorded. It's you're open, you're honest. And so I'm here for it.
And you are talking to people that you really want to talk
I
to.
know. There you go.
I was
That's
just
it
telling
right
you
there, man.
that I had Connor Beaton on, who's a really good friend of mine,
First
and it
class.
was hilarious and so profound and such a good conversation. Like, we'll just have people on that I want to talk to that are
There you go.
my pals. This is the
Yeah.
best.
There you go. Love it.
Okay, so I did do approximately 4 minutes of research though to prepare for this. Caleb, I know your eyes are bulging out,
Impressed.
and I learned that the first podcast that we did, which was so long ago now, 2, 3 years maybe,
Yeah.
but it was called "What If Your Truth Was Different Than You Were Told Was True?" Because
What?
we talked all about your
What if your truth was different than what you were told is true? Okay.
yeah,
I vibe with that.
because you talked about being at West Point and being in the NFL and being successful and being
Mm.
religious, and then all of that you questioned, and you were
Yeah.
in a different season of life, and you ended up living in a church basement, I recall, for a couple years.
5 years.
5 years. Yeah. And so I wanted to dive in there now because I know you're in a new season
Oh,
as a father and as a parent. And I'm curious, are there things that you were told were true that you are now realizing, oh, that wasn't actually the truth?
absolutely. I think the first thing that came to my mind is I was having a conversation with my partner, Kara, a few months ago. And we had recently in this past year, we bought a home, we renovated home, we had a baby, so much transition, so much change. And despite the chaos, it genuinely was like effortless. Like it was effortless inside of the chaos. Let me say it like that. And I was having this conversation with her, and I was like, I want to see how good this can actually get. Like, I want to see how good this life can actually get. And I think the thing that was challenged, the truth that was challenged, that I've been challenging in my own life, is this idea that it doesn't have to be hard to be good. And I think I've assigned that to so many areas of my life. Like, in order for it to be good, it needs to be hard because if it's hard, there's resistance. If I'm leaning into resistance, and then I'm growing as a person. And I think there's an element of truth to that. But in the season that I'm in now, and on the other side of, a 15, almost 15 year, personal development, inner healing, spiritual journey, if you will, I'm in this place of like, oh, it doesn't have to be hard. Like it really doesn't. And that invitation and that idea is wildly challenging in other areas of my life. But I also think it's kind of this container that we can just kind of lean into and continuously live into. And I guess that's the truth, or the once told truth of it has to be hard in order for it to be right, is no longer true in my life.
I love that. I relate to that too. And I feel like when you're starting out, there's a certain element of hustle, grind,
Sure.
earn it. You have to really wake up early, stay up late, don't sleep, struggle, overcome,
Yeah.
resist, overcome resistance. And then it tastes sweeter
Mm.
And then you get to this other level after doing that for a while. And it's like,
Yeah. I
what
think
if
it
it
has
was
its
easy?
right. It has its like role in our lives for sure. But I just think that it needs to be met with this open-hearted curiosity of like, I know for me, the ruthless ambition, the dogged determination, the hustle, it was because I had an identity built around the doing, which is so clear, especially growing up in the Western world. Like it's just the way things and it's the way that we are taught. Like, I mean, shit, we were assigned a letter grade to determine our worth and value as a young child. Like it's ingrained so deeply into us. And so just like the beautiful part of the journey is not it truly isn't like getting to where you want to be. It really is what surfaces along the way. Right? It's just simply, and you know this as a coach, it's just what surfaces along the way is the gift. It is the invitation to deepen and thus, therefore, expand our lives.
Thing that was deep. It reminds me of this quote I saw the other day that said, happiness is the moment before you decide to take a photograph.
Mm,
And so to me, it's like the process, the
mm,
presence, the being in it is actually more fulfilling than capturing or obtaining that thing that you desire
yes.
most.
Yeah, that's
Right.
good. I'm actually got to sit with that. I gotta like. I feel like there's so much wisdom in that quote. Who'd you hear that from?
It was, I think, the title of an article that I read.
Happiness is the moment right before you take the photograph.
It was something like that.
Yeah, I believe it because I think there is this level of like anticipation and expectation for the photo. It's not the photo itself. It is the laughing and getting together with the person, depending on your photo experience. I'm obviously thinking like, I want to be in this photo with this person that I'm taking a photo with, maybe. Like that's where my mind goes.
Yeah,
And I
but
feel
in
like,
terms of like other projects, right? So say
sure.
you're preparing a talk and there's something so profound and fun about preparing a talk or making a painting or writing a book or and then it's done.
Yeah.
And it's like anticlimactic in some
Yes.
sense and there's some kind of emptiness or grieving
Yes.
required of, oh, well now
Can we talk
what?
about that?
I mean, bro, we could talk about anything.
Bro, like that right there, the grieving that comes when we have reached our goals.
Sad.
Man, like I don't feel like enough people talk about that. And
If
that
only we could
is
do a
the
podcast.
man, if only we can do a podcast. I honestly think that is something like even when I got married to Kara, like I met my what I would call like a soul mate, like a soul partner. Like I love my life with this woman. It has broken me wide open in the most unimaginable ways, in the best of ways. And she is always inviting me into a deeper experience of life. And also, she's always mirroring back to me parts of me that I don't always want to see. And she holds it with so much compassion and grace. And it's just this beautiful experience. And still, I had to grieve no longer being single. And it was this weird experience, like, oh, and I think sometimes we can assign so many stories to our grief, like, you know, um, I am moving up in the speaking industry and I am doing so many things and it's new and it's wildly fun and it's attractive and it's financially um you know what's the word I'm looking for it pleases me financially, but yet like there's still this deeply seated grief that my life is no longer like it once was. Like this new season has called me to become new, and so there's just so much loss that is attached to growth and dreams and goals being met. And I think in a lot of ways, how we create the capacity to sustain this next season of growth, to sustain this next season of success, to sustain this next season of achievement, is actually by following our grief and allowing and befriending our grief. It's almost like it creates the depth in which we are willing to grieve creates the height of this next season that we're willing or that we're able to go.
Can you say more about that last sentence?
The depth in which we're willing to grieve, like if we can follow our grief even when it's good, like even when we're grieving the loss of a life that no longer will be in the life that we have now, and what we're going into is beautiful. Like there's still grief, there's loss attached to that. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, when we don't follow that grief, when we don't honor that grief when it surfaces, it's robbing us of the capacity that we have to take and to really enjoy this next season of life, or to sustain the success of this next season. And so, like, if you think of it as a container, if I follow my grief down and I befriend it and I integrate it at the depths in which it takes me, it creates more space, it creates more volume in which I can live and operate within now. And so that increases the margins or the capacity or the volume for the success and the happiness and the satisfaction of what I'm living into. Right. A lot of times we can achieve success, but we're wildly unhappy. And it's because we actually don't have the space to be happy. Right. And so how do we create more space of being happy? We follow the invitations, which is a lot of times our grief, our shame, our fears, our emotions, so on and so forth. How I see it, anyways.
Yeah. So the idea that success or progress or advanced levels of fulfillment and evolution requires a grieving process
Yeah.
to
There's
let
no new
go of.
life without first some sort of death, right? And with
Yeah.
all death, there's loss, and with loss, there's grief. And so it's a nice natural byproduct of it all. But we just have to do the job of honoring it, befriending it, being integrating it, releasing it, allowing it to go on its natural path, so that it allows us to have the space for what's next.
Yeah. I remember Stephen Jenkinson talking about the idea that soil is just everything that didn't make it.
Mm,
Right. And so that everything that is on the surface of the planet, the dirt, the debris, the detritus, all of it is death, and that we're completely immersed in it. Everything that is growing from it is
that's great.
ultimately using the fertilizer of death as a
That's
foundation.
Man, what a beautiful metaphor.
It's wild.
Yeah.
I'm also reminded of this conversation I had with Kendra the other day, and I was kind of being a whiny little brat. And
We're all allowed to do that.
I don't know if you relate to that experience at all, Caleb, as a
Uh,
grown ass man, but having a little moment. And it was funny because the thing that I was whining about was getting wasted. And I was like, God, being sober and not drinking as much as I used to is so annoying. Like, I miss getting hammered. I miss getting absolutely annihilated. I was so good at getting drunk, Caleb. I was so good at it, and it was so easy. And there was the adventure and the fun and the blah, blah, blah. And I was also reminded of the hangovers and the
mm,
intense regret of checking your phone the next day and seeing who you called and what you texted, and the regret and the shame and the guilt and the wasted days, etc. But there was certainly some part of me that I realized I still needed to grieve the loss of that lifestyle or that personality
mm.
in order to step into this new one,
So
which
good,
I
man.
much prefer. And I totally would not go back.
Yeah.
But there's still like a sadness there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the stories that we tell, we assign our stories of like, but look how good my life is. Like, get over it. But
Yeah.
look how great this next season is. So, like, let's move on from that. Or we think that, like, so much of my work is shifting the mindset with leaders inside of corporate America. Right. And so, like, this old mindset, this idea that we have to max out our capacity to get the results that we want, while it worked for a season, it's no longer working. It's leaving us outstretched, and we don't have room to be our best selves and perform at our best. And we certainly don't have room for the joy, the peace, and the happiness that we need to be productive, happy, meaningful creatures as we live this life. And so much of my work is helping these leaders shift their mindset, like a new way to move forward, a new way to move your life forward that doesn't, it's not going to result in you losing yourself in the process. And I think so much of what we see is that as we're on this upward trajectory or on this path of more success or abundance or creating more things in our lives that are good, like there is this grief, and we're afraid to touch that grief, or we're afraid to touch that sadness, or we're afraid to touch that despair because we think it's going to be an obstacle in our path, right? We think it's an obstacle in our way of getting to where we want to be. And the mindset shift is realizing that, oh, wait, no, might I suggest to you that it's not an obstacle in your way. What is surfacing is, in fact, the way, right? It's not an obstacle in the path. It is actually the path that you need to say yes to if you want to deepen your experience and therefore expand your life more sustainably, and therefore able to foster more overall work life satisfaction in your everyday life. And so it's just like whatever is surfacing, even as I say this, Jeremy, one of my favorite all-time quotes, and you probably have heard me say this before, is from Barbara Brown Taylor, who's one of my favorite writers, speakers, and who I would say like a very profound religious teacher, spiritual teacher, not religious, a spiritual teacher in my life. And she has in one of her memoirs, it says, it's not the sadness that will sink a person's life. It's the energy we spend avoiding sadness that will sink a person's life, right? It's not the despair, it's not the loneliness, it's not the grief, it's not the pain. None of these things have the ability to sink your life. It's the energy we spend actually avoiding these things. And we have this uncanny ability in our lives to internalize the sadness, the grief, the despair, the brokenness, and use it as fuel and motivation to move our lives forward. But there comes this moment in our lives, especially if we're teetering on the edge of burnout and we're finding ourselves, that type of tired that more sleep doesn't solve. There's going to come a time that we have to ask ourselves, like, are we actually living or are we avoiding? Right? And that's two totally different ways to move our lives forward. Are we living or are we avoiding? And I just think the way that we can shift that narrative and experience life in the here and now is by recognizing that the grief, the shame, the despair, all these things that are served, they are our path, they are our way. And there's no shame around having any of these experiences, regardless if your life is great or not.
You have an example or two from your own life or from
Sure.
presenting and working with leaders where you could talk about how an obstacle is the way, which, as an aside, great book by Ryan Holiday. The
Yeah, it
Obstacle is
is a
the
great
Way.
book.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just not like what I'm saying is like your fears and your feelings that surface on the journey, they're not obstacles in the way, they are the way. And so as you are working towards your goals, whatever is surfacing, right? The fear of not being enough, the fear of being seen as somebody that, that maybe you don't think that you truly are, that imposter syndrome, whatever is surfacing, getting to the life that you want is not by a new level of success and accomplishment that you're chasing. Getting to the life that you want is actually by acknowledging the fear or the feelings that are surfacing in the moment. Does this make sense? And so it's just like an everyday process for me. Like my pursuit of success and my pursuit of finding the life that I wanted was like chasing one achievement after the next, and I would outwork the best of them. And if I was outworked, I would use it as fuel to double down on my effort and do better and be better and try harder and run faster, harder and longer, but it's made me realize that there was no amount of success that could actually reconcile this war, this feeling like something is wrong internally. And that's when I had to shift things internally in the mindset. And I'll never forget the meeting that I had with my therapist when I was living in Canada. And she had asked me a question, something along the lines of like, Caleb, do you ever think that finding a satisfied life has nothing to do with what you achieve and everything to do with who you believe you are? Right? Nothing to do with what you achieve, but everything, what she asked specifically was everything to do with how you treat yourself. And I was like, bullshit. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. Like, you've been great and all, but I have to just call you out on this one. Like, finding a satisfied life isn't going to happen just because I treat myself well. Like, finding a satisfied life is going to happen by the byproduct of reaching more elevated versions of success. And then I got so angry because in my head, I'm like, you're telling me that like the 5 a.m. wake up calls, the 2 years in the army that I had to keep my dream alive, the 5 a.m. PT sessions, the military trainings in the afternoon, the classrooms work in the evening, and then going to the gym and doing all of this extra work to keep my dream alive for 2 years while it was suspended. Like, you're telling me none of that shit matters. My ambition doesn't matter. I remember getting so angry, dude. And I'll never forget when she looked at me and she's saying, Caleb, that's not what I'm saying. Ambition is not bad. She says, but you will never Be satisfied and proud of the life that you have until you are satisfied and proud of who you are. And that shit hit me like so many, like just straight in the head, you know? And I realized that like what was surfacing in me was so much shame that if you actually saw the real me, like there's no way I would be accepted. And it wasn't until I realized that my shame was the invitation, not the success. So when I could start to befriend the shame and realize that the shame and the fear of being seen was actually my invitation to grow a life that I'm wildly proud of and actually satisfied in, right? Then and only then could I create that experience from the inside out. There was no amount of success, no achievement, no money in the bank that would actually give me the life that I was looking for. It was the shame that I had been running from the entire time that was the key that would unlock my life.
It's so impressive how a person can ask one or two questions and
Sure.
completely dismantle the foundation upon which you
Yes,
build your life.
absolutely. I.e., a great coach and therapist.
One for
That's what it's
me
all
from,
about.
yeah, years ago, Nicole Lowe's, who I had on the podcast and is amazing. She's a somatic practitioner, and she sat down in front of me and after a little bit of small talk said something like, who are you really? What parts of you are leftover survival mechanisms from childhood?
Oh, good.
And how do you tell the difference?
Yeah. Damn.
And I recall dropping my jaw and like putting my head in my hand, being like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I need to sit with that one.
Hmm.
That's a big deal.
That's a big question too. But I think this, what you're saying in my from my experience with my therapist in that moment, it's like we are all looking for answers. And I harp on this a lot. We're all looking for answers in our lives, but in reality, we need to learn how to ask better questions. And so a question that I'm always asking myself, Kara, and also like people that I engage with life with is like, what are the questions that you want answered in your life right now? Like, what are these big questions that you want answered? And if you can create these questions, if you can get really clear on these questions, right, the questions in a lot of ways become the container in which you live from, right? They become, in other words, maybe a prophecy in which you live unto. It's the Rilke quote, right? Or is it? Yeah, he's like, don't look for the answers now because you're not ready to live out the answers. Instead, ask for a question, right? To go
Look
live out the
for the
questions.
question.
And the work is one day you'll realize that you live into the answer. Like that's the work. What are the questions that you want answered right now? I know for me personally, a question that I've been holding almost probably arguably since COVID, the big overarching question in my life is how do I move my life forward from a posture of rest? Right? Like I know how to push, I use this analogy all the time. Like I know how to push the river of my life forward, and I know how to make my life happen, but I'm tired. And I still believe that I can have an incredible life with accomplishing the things that I want to accomplish, but I can do it from a posture of stillness, from a posture of rest. And so, what does it look like to no longer push the river of our lives forward, but realize that, holy shit, wait, there's a river already here, there's a river already flowing. Our job is to learn how to rest in the current so that it could take us where we're going. Right. And for a lot of ways, and it's the difference between living your life surviving versus living your life by participating. And that changes a completely, that totally changes your overall life experience. So, like, just to give you an example, that's the big question I'm asking myself for a couple of years now. And I'm slowly seeing like my life move forward from a place of stillness and a posture of rest. And when I say a posture of rest, it's how we hold ourselves internally, emotionally, and mentally and spiritually. When you have good posture, you walk into a room, you exude confidence, your shoulders are pulled back, your head is lifted high, right? We can also carry that same posture within ourselves. And that's the posture of rest that I am working continuously towards living my life from that posture.
Are there specific practices or rituals that you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for me and for all of the the great mystics and all of the teachers out there that teach the same shit over and over and over again. And one day we just hope we come across somebody that puts it in the language that relates better to us, but it all points to the same answer, you know. And for me, I think David White, he has in one of his poems, The Great Belonging, he says to give up all other worlds except the one which you call your own here and now, like to give up all other worlds. And that's always been hard for me because I've had all of these ideas and expectations of who I think I should be and what I think my life should look like and where I should be in life by now. So I have all these ideas and expectations, and those ideas and expectations are fueling my life forward. But I do it at the expense of being present in my life here and now. And that's just a clear indicator of me pushing my life forward versus actually participating in my life. And so something that I am practicing routinely from the moment I wake up, whenever that is, you know, it is a solid 10 minutes of just stillness, right? 10 minutes of stillness. And in that stillness, all I'm doing is practicing and flexing my muscle of remembrance. So as I'm still, my mind naturally wanders off to the workout I'm about to do. It wanders off to the conversation I had with Kara. It wanders off to the upcoming sales call I have for a keynote. It naturally wanders off to freaking World War III. And the job is then, as I begin to observe the natural flow of my thoughts and them wandering, the job is to bring it back here now. I come back here. I remember that, oh, wait, no. Focus on the inhale and the exhale, the rise and the fall of my stomach. Feel the breath leave my lips. Like just be here now. Feel the floor underneath my feet. And I'll do that for a second. And the next thing you know, my mind wanders again. And so it's not about not allowing your mind to wander. Your not mind is going to wander. It's about recognizing that your mind has wandered and bringing it back to the present. And just like you're expanding, contracting muscles in the gym and you increase the volume and you can carry more weight, through this, we are expanding and contracting our muscles of remembering, and we're able to actually be more present in the here and now. And so that's been a big tool in helping me just create that muscle of remembrance and living more present in the here and now, which is actually me now allowing myself to move my life forward from a posture of rest. And the last thing I'll say on this is last year was the first year that I don't think I had really any goals other than be more present in my life. And I worked on this, like this from the stillness all through the day. I practiced something called mindful awareness. And so mindful awareness is this, like, as I'm driving in the car, like I will feel my hands on the steering wheel. I'll feel the hot air from the heater blowing on my skin. And I'll become so observant for just a few seconds of that. Right. As I'm making my coffee, I listen to the water boiling. As I'm pouring it over my Chemex, I can smell the aroma and also hear the sizzling sound of the water hitting the beans. Right? I can feel my skin stretching as I reach up to grab my mug. It's just bringing awareness to the moment for just a few seconds and doing that periodically throughout your day. And that's where all of my intention was and all of my energy was. And when I tell you, Jeremy, that my life grew more in the past year relationally and financially than it had in the last 5 years of me striving towards my goal. Like, this is exactly what happened. There was so much more expansion relationally, emotionally, personally, also financially in my life by not striving towards my goal, but by actually being more present in the here and now.
What do you think caused that?
Yeah, I think what happens is when we have all of these ideas and expectations of who we think we're supposed to be in the life that we want, and the life we're going after, and where we want to be, where we're going, and we have these ideas and we're constantly living out there chasing those, it actually creates resistance because we're fighting time and we're fighting the present moment. We're doing it at the cost of being present. The only moment that we actually have is in the present, and it's so hard. I feel like it's so profound, but so simple. Like all of the energy to get us to where we want to be is in the present moment. And so the more we can engage in the present, the more we partner with the energy that we have available towards us, right? And the less resistance, because all of these ideas of where we're supposed to be and we wake up in the life that we have and it's not quite aligned yet, right? That creates an element of frustration. It creates more resistance, and that resistance leads to more suffering. Like we're waking up and the life we have is not the life that we want. And we are actually at war with our life, and we become our own worst enemy because no matter how hard we work, we're always one step behind. We can't quite get to where we want to be. And that creates such a despair and a hopelessness over time. It's fueling us, it's motivation for sure, but then it eventually leads to some sort of despair and hopelessness. And that's just a shitty path to be on. It's hard to be in that experience. But the more you can grieve and to let go and to release these ideas and expectations, the more you can surrender to the present. The more you surrender to the present, the more you're actually partnering and co-creating the life from the here and now. And it's the antithesis of everything that we have ever been taught to be true in our life, right? But it truly is, especially if you're somebody that's hitting your head on a wall, going around the same old fucking mountain time and time again. Like that's usually the invitation for you to stop and to go back to the beginning of our conversation. Ask yourself, is what I believe to be true about moving my life forward actually true? Or should that be challenged right now? And so I think that I had given up so much of the resistance that I was experiencing in my life by trying to create this life based on these ideas and expectations of who I think I should be and where I think I should be, which created so much suffering. And life had to be hard, right? But when I gave that up and I actually learned how to be more present in the here and now, and I surrendered to the present, there was less friction, more emotional bandwidth, more emotional margins in my life. As I engaged in the here and now as best as I could, I was shocked by how many opportunities found me, right? Because I think the big change that happens, Jeremy, as I'm talking about this, is it's me remembering that we are really good at making our lives happen. We're not very well versed on how to receive. And when we partner with the present, when we surrender to the present, I think we do open up our receiving portal, right? And we allow like all of that energy, the creating the friction and the suffering of trying to get our life to get to where we think or where we should be in life. Like when that's surrendered, God damn, we have all of this space now, and we're actually opening our hearts. Right? As we settle in, we're opening our hearts to actually receive what the universe is already trying to put in our path.
Can I share a very brief story?
Please.
Uh, I love, I just love you so much, man. Everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, bro, I agree. This is awesome. God, you're smart. Um, I was helping at a retreat in Sedona a couple weeks ago for my buddy Mark Groves, and one of the women on the retreat, her name's Hanan. She's this wonderful Saudi Arabian badass, and I was present in the moment, and I was walking past somewhere, and her and her friend Nada were talking to the concierge or somebody about getting a rental, getting a ride to the airport tomorrow. And because I was present and aware, I heard this and I said, "Oh, I'm going to the airport tomorrow. Like, why don't you just come with me? Like, we can take a ride together. It's fine." And so I drove these two women to the airport, and we had this great conversation. And the point of the story is not that this is going to happen, but to demonstrate how these things do happen. And so
Yeah.
we're talking, and we're talking about this Camino walk that I do, where I take 8 people on a 200-kilometer walk. And she says, "Oh, I used to do that in Nepal, and we climbed up in the Himalayas, and it was so wonderful. And I haven't done it in a while. Would you be interested in doing that with me?" And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. And so we started vibing about the idea or the opportunity of me getting flown to Nepal and doing a walk in the Himalayas, which is something that has been on my bucket list my whole life, really. Right. And so I have no idea if this is going to happen. I've released the expectation of it. But as I was reflecting on it on my flight that day, it was a really powerful reminder for me of exactly what you were discussing there, which is if you are present, the universe just offers opportunities to receive in the most unlikely and uncommon ways.
Yeah.
Versus me deciding I'm going to do a retreat in Nepal. I know nothing about that area. I've never been there. I'm going to spend dozens of hours trying to flesh this out, do research, make it happen, sell it, blah, blah, blah. Or I can be present and be kind and offer this random lady a ride to the airport and
Yeah.
literally have it fall in my lap.
Mm.
Uh, so I just wanted to offer that out into the world. It does
Yeah.
happen that way. I've had, I'm sure you are the same, so many opportunities, connections, people, podcasts, jobs, money, all completely
Yeah.
inadvertently arrive in the most random and serendipitous circumstances.
Absolutely. And I think it under yeah, it at the core of that, and I love that story so much. There's like this underlying belief that has to be, I feel like, reconciled in our lives. And it's like that the universe is for me. I think we go through life and we get the shit beat out of us and we shut down our hearts towards life because it's us versus the world. And part of the healing journey is realizing that, okay, I can teach these self-protective parts. I can teach these wounded parts of my psyche and that inner child inside of me that, hey, the war is over and I can take care of myself. And as you do that, the natural byproduct of it is realizing that the universe is for me, the universe is for me, I live with more openness. And as I live with more openness and I'm more present, right, I'm inviting and I'm co-creating, because the co-creating part of this, from what I hear, is that you have the desire to experience this and you've probably voiced this desire. You probably journaled about this desire. You probably put it out to the universe before. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a natural intention, there's a desire, and that's your energy. That's your job. What we surrender is giving up the how, right? And I think a lot of people, what is really uncomfortable with this is like my hand gestures. What's uncomfortable with this is it feels like passivity. It feels like this resignation, like, oh, you're just telling me to sit back and do nothing and life's going to come my way. No, dumbass. No, that's not what I'm saying to you, right? But I'm saying, like, if the hustle and the striving and the figuring it out and beating your head against the wall for the 115th time is no longer working, right? There might be another way of doing this. And I think the big mindset shift really that happens is like, us versus the world doesn't get us to where we want to be, but an open heart, right? Inviting, co-creating the life that we want, participating in our life in the here and now is the fastest way to get to where we want to be.
It goes back to that great question you presented earlier about the achieving versus the believing in yourself. And I think what we're discussing and proposing here to the listener is that the being is the achieving,
Yes.
and that you're not asking them to not do anything. What we're actually asking them to do, and that we are leaning into ourselves, is to do something very difficult, which is to be present
Yes.
and to be kind and to love ourselves.
Yes.
That
Radical
shit ain't
thoughts.
easy.
Radical thoughts. Because the shit ain't easy. And this is why we'll be the greatest, create the greatest distractions on this idea of like, oh no, but if I just get there, if I just do that, if I just achieve this, right? It's this beautiful self-protection mechanism that prevents us and really distances us from the real work that needs to be done if we want to create meaningful contribution and do it in a very satisfied life.
Yeah. This idea or this question of what if it was easy,
Mm-hmm.
I have heard and used as well.
Yeah.
If this was easy, if this was all going to work out so easy and so fun, how would this unfold? I think
Yeah.
is a fun thought experiment
A
too.
really fun thought experiment.
Have you ever
Oh, sorry.
go?
I'm realizing too, Jeremy, that success, and I said this recently at one of my follow-up, like in a Q&A after a keynote. Success isn't the byproduct of just hard work alone. Success is also, especially like success and satisfaction, is also the byproduct of having a nervous system that feels safe with that success. And I think when it comes to, like, for me personally, goodness, magic, satisfaction in my life, like, I'm realizing that I don't have a very high tolerance for how much I can actually hold. And this is how it's been manifesting in my life. I look up to you so much, especially around the fact that you don't drink alcohol. And I've been having this internal conversation and also externally with some close friends and my wife, Kara, where I'm like, isn't it really fucked up that I just booked the highest keynote that I've ever booked? And it's amazing. Like, I'm pumped about this. And the way I congratulate myself is making a cocktail. And I've been thinking about this. Like, you mean to tell me, like, I'm going to celebrate my success by poisoning my body? And I don't think it's necessarily the cocktail in and of itself. It's not the drink that I'm going to make that's the issue, right? The issue is that I am experiencing this elevated satisfaction, this elevated goodness in my life. And I've reached my threshold where now that goodness and that satisfaction, it triggers me because I have historically been told the biggest story I've had to get over is just a matter of time. The biggest story that I've had to release is like, it's just a matter of time before the shit hits the fan. Right? That's been a big story anytime I've experienced success. Well, it's good now, but just a matter of time because I have zero tolerance for actually holding the goodness in my life and in my body. And so, what I naturally do, what I've been realizing is after I experience some elevated form of satisfaction and success, I have to knock myself down a couple notches by putting alcohol in my body so that I feel more comfortable, so my nervous system feels more comfortable. And so the other day, after like I'm processing this on the couch by myself, and I'm laying there because it's 5:30. I just got off a massive sales call. You know, this is potentially going to lead to a $90,000 consulting package. I'm like, oh my God, like this was a 20-minute call. And I realized my first instinct was to make a drink. But then I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to recalibrate the baseline of goodness that my body can hold. You know how uncomfortable that shit was?
And
Just sitting there,
so
allowing my body to fully feel this goodness and like telling myself, like, hey, this is your new baseline. You can hold the uncertainty and the vulnerability that comes with success and more responsibility. Like this is you're literally increasing your thermostat to the tolerance level of goodness. And I think this is really important when it comes to success and satisfaction in our lives. Like, yeah, go work hard, but also realize that with more success comes more vulnerability, more uncertainty, more unpredictability, more pressure, and more stress sometimes. And if you don't have the nervous system that can hold that, right, the very thing that you look forward to in your life, like I talk about this all the time. After I get drafted, my childhood dream comes true. What happens? I go back to my barracks at West Point and I had my first ever panic attack. I thought I was literally going to die. And it's because my nervous system could not support that measure of success, that weight of success in my life. And what happens is the very moments that should mean everything to us become the moments that fracture us. And so I just think I don't even know why I started talking about this and begin with, but I think it's such an important conversation that we start realizing that there is a threshold to the goodness and the magic that you can hold in your body because it's vulnerable and it's uncomfortable. And our work, if we want to see more increase of that in our lives, is actually teaching our body to hold it more consciously and rising that threshold, increasing that threshold. And I think when our threshold increases from that standard, from that perspective, we can naturally invite in bigger opportunities. Like we partner with the universe in a greater way to bring in even more things that we want.
ah, I love this, man. And I also look up to you and I really appreciate you sharing so tenderly and openly. You're like, this is some vulnerable stuff. You're like, I'm kicking ass at life, I'm crushing my dreams, and I want to drink it away. And so I love this
Thanks, man.
topic. I love this conversation, man. And I just really appreciate you bringing that forward. And what came up for me was that you seem to have like gone through a boot camp years back where you got really good at processing grief and shame, which we talked about previously as being a requirement for success. And now you're leaning into this
Yes.
completely opposite end of the spectrum of joy and self-worth and worthiness as being very uncomfortable skills that you get to practice,
Yes.
right? And I
Yes.
think at a smaller level, I think we can all relate to this of receiving a compliment, receiving
Absolutely.
praise. I know from a business perspective, I have faced this and continue to face this in terms of price and the value literally that I put on my time or my experiences, my workshops. And I've had conversations with people and they say things like, no, you need to charge way more for that. And I will feel in my
Yes.
body, in this nervous system, extreme resistance and extreme discomfort. And then my brain starts screaming
Yeah. Yeah.
justifications and fear and things from the past. And it is so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I love this idea that leaning into success and expansion requires a very similar skill set to the grief and the shame, but
Yes.
it will feel very differently as well.
So much different. Feels so much different. But it's just, I don't know. It also, and then this goes back, it kind of ties into like the question that I asked, like asking yourself different questions. Like if you want to move your life forward, what questions are you holding out to the universe? And I think this all stems from like me literally holding this question out to the universe, saying like, I want to know how good it can get. Like that was the exact question that's written in my journal. How good can it actually get? And so now I'm on this other side of the journey of like realizing that, okay, my goodness, there's a little tolerance. Like I don't have much tolerance to holding the goodness in my life right now before I have to knock myself down. And so now we're in this journey of like, oh, building up my tolerance to experience more goodness, more magic, more peace, more rest, more love, more abundance in my life. It's a beautiful journey, man, but it's wildly uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it also questions the infrastructure upon which your life is based,
Absolutely.
which is your
Absolutely.
belief system and how you see yourself and how you see the world.
Totally. Totally. And this
It's
is, I mean, because this is like, if you would have asked me, and I think you probably have asked me, if I'm over football, I would have told you, like, hell yeah, I'm over football. I was over football the month after I left the game. It's been 12 years, 13 years, whatever it's been. I don't even know how long it's been. That's how much over I am. Bro, when I tell you this past playoff season, I was watching the playoffs and I heard like almost a goddamn audible voice from God himself, whoever that thing is up there, or out there, or whatever. And it was this audible voice that said, it's time to let go. And I was like, what? It's time to let go. And I'm like, and I knew exactly what this meant. Like in my body, I was like, it's time to let go of football. But if you would have asked me that, if I had let go already, I would have said emphatically, hell yes. But the truth of the matter is that maybe my mind has, but my body hasn't. This is a decade later, my body hasn't. And what I realized as I have followed this journey down, and what I've realized is that my my daughter is making a lot of noise. What I've realized is, I graduated from the academy with 972 other cadets. They went to war. I went to the NFL. I quickly internalized that my way of giving back would be the success in the NFL, right? My success would be the way that I would give back. So the NFL would be my battle to fight, my war to win. My career in the NFL, by all standards of success, is wildly less than. And so I have had so much shame in my life that I didn't do my part. I didn't do what was required of me. I didn't live up to what I was supposed to do. And that shame has crystallized and formed this wild ambition to figure out my life and to take my life to the next level so that I can compensate and make up for the deficit. And I realized that this shame and this deficit as the driving force behind my life, right? Like that was the thing that was actually keeping me from experience more satisfaction and success in my life here and now, right? And god damn, my daughter just threw me off and I totally lost the train of thought on why I was telling you this story. But it'll come full circle in just a second.
love that
I'm
ending.
sorry, my daughter was just she's banging something up there and it threw me off.
You're good. What I like about that is so you talk about how football you thought was behind you, but then a decade later you
Sure.
realize, oh, subconsciously it
It's
actually lives
not.
in my system.
Yeah,
And
there's a reason why I brought that up though.
yeah, and maybe
Anyways, people will
I'll
get what they need
ramble.
to
But it's also true for divorce,
Yes.
childhood, breakups, infidelity, any number of things, right? And it's this confrontation with the way that you limit yourself based upon your past beliefs serving you then, but not serving you now because your reality is different, right?
Yeah.
And so for you, when confronted with success, when confronted with expansion and growth and these wonderful big contracts to speak and change your life, you immediately remember in your system, oh, the last time that this happened, that equals failure,
Failure.
shame,
Absolutely.
disappointment, etc. So I'm going to
Absolutely.
prevent myself from feeling that by making myself feel that in a smaller way now.
Yes.
It's a form of self
Why you're a
sabotage.
great coach.
Thanks, bro.
I'm so sorry that I lost my train of thought.
It's all good.
Yeah, I'll
It's
remember
all,
it tonight and I'm going to text you. I'm like, God damn it. I remember what I was saying.
no,
But
it's
what
good,
you're saying
man.
is good right there. Yeah, absolutely.
And so your work, it sounds like, is to let yourself believe in your greatness, or what? How do you view it? Like,
Yeah, I
what's your
think now it's like realizing that when you start with the deficit, you end with the deficit, right? When the deficit is your motivator, and when the deficit is the fuel behind your life, there's a reason why. It's like there's a reason why it's still not enough, right? Because what you're starting with is already a deficit. It's for a more practical example, when you wake up and you already feel behind, and that feeling of behind is in you keeping you in a rush, and you cross off every to-do list that you have on your list, but you lay down in bed and you still feel behind, and there's no amount of work that's going to make you feel like you could catch up. It's because we're starting our day from a deficit, right? We're starting our day from deficit energy. And so there has to come a time when we actually acknowledge the deficit, realize the deficit, and do the hard work of shifting the deficit. And for me, it looks like actively leaning into the shame with this story, right? Actively leaning into this shame and realizing, and ultimately, why I was so mad at myself, and I was using my self criticism and self anger to motivate me. But this is why I was, no matter how much I achieved, it still wasn't enough. I wasn't satisfied in my life. And this is my therapist saying, hey, you'll never be satisfied and proud of your life until you're satisfied and proud of who you are. And so this shame has robbed me and crippled me of a healthy relationship with self at a deeper, more intimate level and experience. And also really shaping the way that I allow other people to see me, because if they see hard enough, they might just see what I'm hiding way down there. And so it's also crippled personal relationships in my life. But as I have actively integrated this shame and worked through the shame and starting to like just allow those shame narratives to lessen in my life, there's no coincidence that I'm seeing more satisfaction, a stillness and peace and success in my life in the here and now. So I just think what we're all talking about here, really, if we can sum it up, it's like the inner game. It's like all of the prerequisites to experiencing this beautiful, magical, satisfying life that's available to us all. If we would just devote a little bit of the energy that we spend so much on either hanging on, trying to keep it all together, surviving, or that we spend it on actively pursuing more, right? If we can just take that energy and kind of shift it internally, I think we'll be greatly pleased at just the overall different life experience that we have.
Just to follow up on that, how do you wake up with surplus energy? I
Yeah,
presume that's the opposite of deficit energy.
yeah.
What's
Deficit,
that?
or I just call it present energy.
Present
And
energy.
so it's just waking up. I sit on the edge of my bed. God forbid I'm not looking at my phone, but I feel my feet hit the floor. I take a breath, like I center myself. I don't just roll out of bed. And something like what's been important for me, which was hard, especially having a 1 year old who, early on just wouldn't sleep, is like I usually would wake up whenever she woke up, and she would wake up screaming, and then I would wake up like, but now it's like, oh, I have to wake up. I set my alarm earlier so that I can start from the present, right? So it's just this moment of like, okay, like I'm engaging with the present. I'm here in the present before I do anything else. And this is like, honestly, it's like building a muscle in the gym that you've never worked out before. It doesn't feel like it's making a difference. It doesn't feel like it's working, right? It doesn't like make an immediate impact on your life. But God damn, if you just continue to show up and practice this muscle of being present and practicing mindful awareness throughout your day, it is wild how you can shift that deficit energy, because deficit energy is always, always being at war with time. And we are never going to win that war. For me, the deficit energy of that shame was like, I'm running out of time. I need to make my life happen now. I need to do something big now. Like I'm running out of time. So all of my ambition was at war with time. Right. So I'm never going to win that game. When we wake up in the morning and we have a to-do list longer than we care, and we wake up thinking that we are already behind and we're rushing through our day, we're at war with time. We never win that time. I think it's who wrote The Big Leap? Guy Hendricks. I think
Okay.
he has a whole section in there about Einstein time. Right? It's this concept called Einstein time. And I think it's like the idea of if you sit on a hot stove for a second, it feels like 30 minutes because it burns, like you're resisting time. But if you are engaging with the conversation with a loved one and time flies by and it's 30 minutes and it felt like 1 second, you're in partnership with time. Why? The difference is you're resisting the moment and that congeals time, creates more friction. You're at war with time. The other side of it is you're fully present in the moment. You're engaging in that conversation. You're fully in it. And then what happens is it flies by and you're no longer at war with time.
I really like that a lot. I'm reminded of this conversation I had at a Vipassana meditation retreat a couple months ago, which is it's a 10-day silent retreat, no talking, no
Beautiful.
reading, no nothing, man, nothing. And at the orientation, there was a guy that had done one previously, and I asked him what his main takeaway was or any advice for me going into it. And he kind of looked over at the trees and
As one does.
thoughtfully perused his brain for a moment, and he said, you know, 24 hours is actually a whole lot of time. And I was like, oh shit, like I am in for it now. And sure enough, that 10-day period seemed like a month, the
Dude, that's tough work
slowest
right there.
days. Yeah.
That's tough work.
I was so present all the time. And that was the battle.
Yeah.
Like, oh
Oof.
my gosh, it's not lunch yet. How has it only been 20 minutes of meditation? We have an hour. And that idea that time is this flexible kind of thing rather than a concrete second by second, minute, month, year thing.
Yep.
Very peculiar and worth exploring.
There he is. And it's also a lot funner if you take a few mushrooms.
That was part of the retreat, though. No drugs.
No drugs.
But it did cross my mind, especially as I was wandering through the forest periodically.
Yeah.
Caleb,
Stuff.
I think this is a good place to wrap, man. You
Absolutely.
always got to leave them wanting more,
Yeah.
and I want to continue this conversation. So that's perhaps a good sign.
Yeah.
But
Love
thanks for being here, man. Thanks for
it.
being in my life. Thanks for all the work you do. And this was so nutritious and juicy. I have like 10 different quotes, timestamps written down for you.
Awesome.
But for those listening that want to get more of you, I know you're on Instagram, but you got a
Kind
website.
of.
But what's the best way to get more Caleb Campbell?
Yeah, not too active on Instagram these days. My website, calebcampbell.me, kind of highlights the work that I'm doing with leaders, with teams, with organizations, really just helping them create more capacity within themselves, within their teams, and within their organizations so that they can reduce burnout and create more sustainable success while fostering more overall work life satisfaction. So that highlights a lot of the work. And then you can also always find me on Instagram. I pop up from time to time when I feel like I have a little energy for it at Caleb_Campbell.
And I'll put links in the show notes
Yeah,
to
thank you.
those. And I'm just realizing I had only 3 notes written down to cover for this. And the third one was leadership and capacity. And I realized we didn't even hit that. So I might need
Well,
to
it
bug
will be
bug
needed.
you in a couple months. Come back for next season.
Love it, brother. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Absolutely.